Hurricane Maria was a Category 5 storm that struck Puerto Rico in September 2017. It was the largest natural disaster to hit the island and caused the worst electrical blackout in US history. 3,000 people died because of Maria and its after effects that included decimated roads, fuel shortages, and a lack of clean tap water. 6 months after the storm, I traveled with a team from Virginia Tech to sample rural drinking water systems. Most of these were community-run and consisted primarily of a stream dammed with concrete and a PVC pipe running down the mountain to a chlorination tank. We weren't sure what the state of the island was going to be like. We knew most areas had power, but not all had recovered. As we were driving across the island to meet with our collaborators at the university we teamed up with, I couldn't help but notice all the trees and even highway signs were actually at a 45-degree angle, where presumably they once were vertical. Graciela, the professor at the university we were working with, had insisted we rent SUVs because she said these communities were especially hard to reach. But I was a little skeptical of this because I drive my Prius all over Virginia and I'm fine. But I soon realized she was serious as we found ourselves pushing the accelerator to the floor of our RAV4, trying to go up a mountain so steep you couldn't actually see the road below. We tried this about 3 times of just driving up and going back down, and we eventually had to just move all our supplies into our collaborator's truck because it wasn't going to happen for us. Most of the communities we sampled in didn't have power yet, but the immediate dangers like flash floods and trees falling onto roads had passed. Each community was recovering in their own unique way. Systems that relied on chlorination had had issues when supplies couldn't get to the island, so they had to distribute untreated water. Systems that relied on filtration had issues when all this debris was kicked up in the storm and they couldn't actually filter the water. Residents of the communities we sampled in got sick and died after the hurricane. One of the reasons we were sampling was to see if there were drinking water pathogens still in the water 6 months after the storm. I became an engineer because I wanted to help people and society with the big challenges. You know, the big challenges, whatever that means. At the age of 15, the plan was grow up, go to college, and save the world. But that's a much bigger task than I thought. But what does that look like on an individual scale? For me in Puerto Rico, it looked like very little sleep and a lot of tiny tubes spent back to our lab here in Blacksburg. Each of these hundreds of tubes contained tiny pieces of filters that were frozen in time with water that the drinking water from each system had passed through. We looked for pathogens in these filters, and while we didn't want to find them, we did. We actually found the DNA of a harmful bacteria called Leptospira that a resident of a community we sampled in actually died of. This was a real person, a 64-year-old Puerto Rican who likely drank or showered in this water and got sick because of it. Leptospira contamination often happens because there's animal urine contaminating your water. But after a hurricane, pretty much everything's contaminated with everything else. But we did this sampling in March 2018, and it's March 2020, and we still haven't been able to publish our results and share them with the world. Doing good science is hard. Because before you can test for a pathogen, you have to make sure you could actually detect it if it was there. And while theoretically detecting a pathogen is easy, in reality it actually takes months to get a new assay to work. But this is what really gets me. This year, when I was taking my dog to get his vaccines at the vet asked, "Oh, is he going to be running and hiking with you?" I said, "Yeah, like that's why I got a dog." She suggested he should get the Leptospira vaccine. Wait, what? I mean, I love my dog, but he is a dog. Why is he getting a vaccine that the people of Puerto Rico didn't have? I mean, I haven't had it either, and I know this now. In the United States of America, the richest country in the world, and yes, Puerto Rico's a part of that, we assume that everyone has access to clean drinking water. We base our public health policies and vaccine schedules on the idea that every American can get clean drinking water out of their tap. Maybe something we found here is that there's an added suite of vaccines you should get if you live in an area prone to contamination events like hurricanes. I don't know. I got into studying water because it affects everyone without exception. I started doing research because it lets you tackle those big challenges that on the grand scale seem insolvable, but when you zoom in to the very, 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 very small scale, you can actually move the needle a little bit. Thus far in grad school, I've learned that doing good science takes an incredible amount of time and energy. And meanwhile, life goes on. I want to do good science, but I also want to graduate and have a career and a life. I got into this field to help others, and right now it seems like there's infinitely different paths forward. Do I want to go into academia? Am I willing to move anywhere for a job? It seems like as a professor, you work almost constantly writing grants. But would I work constantly in any job I got? I like making my own schedule. Tenure, it sure sounds nice, but I keep hearing about how we're graduating too many PhDs and we're all doomed. Shit. In my field of environmental engineering, industry and consulting are also an option. But would I get to use any of the skills I've developed in my PhD? Or would I really have spent all these years getting an unnecessary degree? And how would this allow me to further help others? Will I become a corporate Scrooge filling up timesheets to maximize billable hours? I don't know. But it's something I think about often. Earlier this year, I started working with a woman whose life is centered around her community. She, unlike me, doesn't have the choice of if she's going to engage in science or not. You see, she believes that her local government's practices of applying sewage on the land near her home is making her, her family, and her community sick. She's been in and out of the hospital with infection after infection, but she's the most committed person I've ever met. She's worked with countless researchers and professors to get exactly the soil, water, or air sample they need to best answer the questions about this sewage. When I started working with her, she gave me a list of all the samples that she had collected over the years, including a human lung that the local hospital was keeping for her when one of her neighbors had had to have surgery. Her and her community's health are on the line, and she doesn't get to go home at the end of the day like the researchers and faculty I work with. She's a citizen scientist, but she's also a wife, a mom, and the primary caregiver to her own aging mother. I started working with her to culture what are called antibiotic-resistant pathogens to see if we can help her answer the question if the bacteria in the soil are the same as that in the bacteria in her lung infections. And while I want to find all the answers for her, in reality, I know I won't be able to. You see, proving that a bacteria in the soil is the same as the one that gave you a lung infection is incredibly difficult because bacteria evolve so quickly. At best, we might be able to say that the bacteria in the soil is the same species as the bacteria in their lung infection site, but that's not enough for proof. It sucks. But it doesn't suck as bad as believing you're being made sick because of your city's backwards sludge policies. At the end of the day, we have to try. We have to try so that people living in communities like hers, but with no one to advocate for them, don't get caught up in the, well, we've always done it this way mentality that's so easy to fall into. We have to try because maybe this time we'll get lucky and answer all those questions. Science is often portrayed as the tireless pursuit to the answers of life, the universe, and everything. And while, yeah, sometimes we're asking those questions, most of the time we're just trying to figure out what's going on. For the people of Puerto Rico and other people living in hurricane-prone areas, science might help us figure out how to best get drinking water systems up and running after a storm. For the people living near land-applied sewage, Science might be the answer to years of persistent, unexplained sickness. For me, science is a job. I'm an engineer, but I also want to be someone who would notice if there's something going wrong in the water where I live. We need to be both citizens and scientists. I can't live in the ivory tower or the corporate office without recognizing that I'm connected to the community around me, even if it's just through the drinking water. Growing up, the plan was go to college, save the world. That's a much bigger task than I thought. Go figure. Now I believe that by working with communities around you, as well as those who reach out to you, regardless of your job title, you can make a difference. Thank you.